Some patterns don't show up all at once. They creep in slowly like frost across a window, one thin line at a time, until suddenly the whole glass is white and you realize you haven't seen clearly in years. That's what my family did to me. Not with screaming fights or dramatic betrayals, but with empty chairs, missing invitations, and the quiet, polished way they taught me I was always just a little too something. Too young. Too much, too easy to leave out. Every afternoon after school, 12 years old with my backpack still digging into my shoulders, I would march straight past the kitchen and head for the mailbox. It became my private little ritual. The metal door squeaked when I pulled it open, the smell of paper and dust rising up as I sifted through bills and catalogs, my fingers trembling just a little as I searched for one thing, a thick cream envelope with my name written in fancy calligraphy. Miss Claire Anderson. I could see it so clearly in my mind like a scene from a movie. Me in a silk dress, petals floating from my basket as I walked down the aisle in front of my big brother David and his perfect bride-to-be, the flower girl, his sister. Of course I would be there. How could I not? At dinner, I tried to sound casual as I pushed cold peas into a tiny green mountain. Did you hear anything about the flower girl dress yet? I asked Mom again because I had asked before, and every time her answer slipped further away from anything solid. Her fork scraped against the plate, the sound too loud in our small kitchen. "Claire, honey, we've talked about this," she said, smoothing her napkin. "The wedding plans are still coming together. But we hadn't talked about it, not really. We had danced around it while she redirected the conversation to centerpieces and menus. David said I could help with something I insisted. He promised at Christmas." She set down her fork, and the clink was like a warning bell. "Claire, we need to have a conversation." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone, the one adults use when they're about to explain something obvious that will quietly break your heart. "The wedding is going to be very elegant." Mom began folding and unfolding her napkin with too much focus. "David and Rachel have decided to make it adults only. No children at all." The words hit like a punch to the chest. I stared at her. "But I'm his sister." She reached for my hand. "You're 12, sweetheart. This is what sophisticated couples do nowadays. It's nothing personal." My voice cracked as I asked, "Did David say that about me not coming?" Her silence told me everything I needed to know. The chair scraped against the linoleum as I pushed away from the table. Before she could say anything else, I walked down the hall to my bedroom, shut the door, and curled up on my bed, hugging my knees to my chest like I could hold myself together by force. Through the heating vent, I heard her voice later that night drifting up from the kitchen, softened by distance, but still sharp enough to hurt. "No, she's finally accepted it," she said to whoever was on the other end, probably Aunt Susan. I knew she'd understand eventually. Claire's always been such a mature girl. My maturity rolled off her tongue like a compliment, but it landed inside me like a verdict. Apparently, being mature meant knowing how to swallow disappointment quietly, so the adults could keep their pretty picture unruffled. I pulled out my art supplies and sat at my desk, hands shaking just a little as I started working on a card for David and Rachel. If they didn't want me there, maybe I could still prove that I was loving, supportive grown-up. I drew hearts and flowers, colored them in carefully, and wrote congratulations in my best cursive. The paper got wet in a few places where tears slipped down before I could catch them, buckling the surface just slightly, but I kept going. The morning of the wedding came bright and clear, the kind of day you imagine for fairy tale photos. Everyone else had left the night before to stay at the hotel near the venue. The house felt enormous and hollow, every footstep echoing through the quiet like a reminder, you're not invited. In my closet, I found the pale pink dress Mom had bought me for Easter, the one with the satin sash. I slipped it on and smoothed the skirt, then stood in front of my mirror and practiced walking slowly the way I thought a flower girl should, head high, small steps, hands curved like they were holding an invisible basket of rose petals. I moved across my bedroom carpet, dropping imaginary petals toward an altar that didn't exist, toward a brother who had decided his little sister didn't fit the aesthetic. "Thank you for helping make our day so special," I whispered to my reflection, rehearsing the words I would never actually hear from him. I smiled anyway, the way I'd seen bridesmaids smile in magazines, already learning how to play a part in a story I wasn't truly part of. 2 weeks later, Mom spread the wedding photos across the kitchen table like they were trophies. The glossy prints gleamed in the morning light, David in his tuxedo, Rachel glowing in her white gown, relatives smiling like they were auditioning for a magazine spread. I leaned over them, my pulse slowing with every picture. The space where a flower girl should have stood was glaringly empty, a gap in every frame that no one seemed to notice but me. See, Mom said, her tone breezy, as if she were proving something. You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. It was very formal, lots of boring speeches. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and stirred my cereal until the flakes turned soggy. Each photo felt like evidence in a case I was losing proof that my absence wasn't an accident, but a quiet decision everyone had agreed on. When David and Rachel returned from their honeymoon 3 weeks later, they brought me a t-shirt from Hawaii Pink with bright hibiscus flowers. "Sorry you couldn't be there, kiddo," David said, ruffling my hair like I was still 6. "Maybe next time, huh?" I smiled because that's what polite little sisters do, but the word stuck somewhere in my chest. Maybe next time. I wore the shirt to bed that night, tracing the printed flowers with my fingertips. Even at 12, I knew what that sentence really meant, that there would always be a reason next time wasn't quite right for me. 2 years later, when Joel got engaged, I could already feel it coming. The whispers started first, the sudden hush when I walked into a room. Mom's phone calls that drifted toward the porch when she thought I wasn't listening. Joel's girlfriend, Sarah, showing me her ring, her face bright with excitement but never mentioning bridesmaids. 14 now, I was old enough to read between lines adults thought they'd hidden. One afternoon, I found a guest list on the counter, Sarah's handwriting in looping script. I scanned the names, finger tracing down the column: Mom, Dad, David, Rachel, Lauren, Alex. And that was it. No Claire. That night, while Joel watched TV in Dad's recliner, I asked him, "Will I be at your wedding?" He laughed his eyes, never leaving the screen. "It's adults only, Claire Bear. Nothing personal." The old nickname stung more than the words. "But I'm not a kid anymore." He reached for the remote, smirking. "You'll understand when you're older." I didn't say anything else, but something small inside me cracked like thin ice under too much weight. Later that week, I overheard Sarah in the kitchen, her voice rising over the clatter of dishes. "But she's your sister," she said. I don't understand why Mom's reply was sharp, practiced. "Trust me, Claire understands. She's so mature for her age." That phrase again, the weapon disguised as praise. My maturity had become their favorite excuse, the polite translation of "she won't make a scene." The morning of Joel's wedding, the house was silent. My parents had left the night before, their suitcases by the door, their good clothes hanging in garment bags. I sat at my desk with algebra homework spread in front of me, pencil moving without focus. Every tick of the grandfather clock downstairs counted the hours they were gone. The phone rang 3 times. Mom's voice filled the answering machine. "Honey, just checking in. There's pizza money on the counter." Each message sounded lighter, more relieved, as if my quiet absence made everything simpler. When the wedding photos came home, they were just like before. Perfect smiles, glowing, light people standing shoulder to shoulder in some manicured garden. "Look how beautiful everything turned out," Mom said, sliding one across the table. I stared at the image at the place where I would have stood if things were fair. My spoon rested in the bowl flakes sinking under milk. "It's lovely," I said, because by then I'd learned that silence could be its own kind of armor. That spring, Lauren got engaged, and for the first time, hope flickered again. My sister, my only sister, caught me after school one afternoon, her eyes shining. "You'll be in my wedding for sure," she said, squeezing my hands. "I want you as a junior bridesmaid." I believed her. For months, we spent Saturdays in bridal shops sipping cucumber water, while saleswomen pinned swatches against our skin. "This shade of coral," she said once, pressing the fabric to my cheek, "it's perfect for you." I smiled so hard my face hurt because I thought finally. But hope has a cruel sense of timing. The whispers returned slow and familiar, like an old habit my family couldn't quit. I caught pieces of conversations through closed doors, snippets about traditions and venue restrictions. When her fiancé's family visited, the hush around me was deafening. Then one night, Lauren sat on my bed twisting her engagement ring. The thing is, she said softly, "Tom's family is really traditional. They think 18 is the cutoff for guests. And since you'll only be 16, I stared at her, searching her face for a trace of the sister who'd promised. "I'll be 17 in November," I said. "Almost 18. Her eyes filled with tears. "The venue is already booked, and Mom says I know what Mom says," I interrupted. "I'm so mature for my age. I understand." The next morning I didn't, but I told myself I did. By the time Alex announced his engagement, something in me had already gone quiet. It was Christmas dinner, and I remember the flicker of the tree lights catching the edges of the gold-edged invitations he handed out, like party favors. My cousins Jennifer and Kate, both freshly 18, giggled as they opened theirs, showing off the fancy calligraphy to the table. I didn't even need to look down at my empty hands to know there wasn't one for me. Later in the garage, I found Alex hunched over Dad's old lawnmower grease smudged across his fingers. "I don't get it," I said, keeping my voice calm. "They just turned 18. I'm 17 and a half. He didn't look up. "Rules are rules, Claire." I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. These aren't rules, they're choices. That night, I deleted the Pinterest boards where I'd saved wedding flowers and dresses. I unfollowed every bridal account on Instagram. I wrote 3 words in my journal: "No more begging." When the whispers started again, I didn't lean in to listen. When Mom left wedding magazines on the coffee table, I stacked them neatly in the recycling bin. At Sunday dinners, I smiled and asked about the weather. They wanted maturity, so I gave them perfection: quiet, polite, unshakable. If exclusion was their tradition, I would meet it with silence sharp enough to cut. College applications became my escape route. Vermont looked like freedom in the brochures: maple trees, mountains, air that didn't carry my family's expectations. When Mom asked why I was applying so far away, I said something about their English program, but the truth was simpler. 8 hours by car felt like safety. The night before Alex's wedding, she knocked softly on my door. "You sure you'll be okay tomorrow?" she asked, twisting her pearls. "We could set up a movie marathon, or you could spend the day with Mrs. Peterson." I smiled the way I'd been trained to calm, reasonable, untouchable. "Actually, it works out better this way," I said. "I've got a big test Monday." Her shoulders relaxed in relief. "Of course," she said. "I understand." But I knew she didn't. She never had. When the acceptance letter from Vermont arrived that spring, I didn't show it to anyone right away. I wanted to keep that joy untainted, my first victory that belonged entirely to me. I told them weeks later at Thanksgiving. The table was set with Mom's best china, the room thick with the smell of roasted turkey and forced civility. "Vermont's pretty far," she said, passing me the mashed potatoes. "There are good schools closer to home." I spooned a small portion onto my plate. "I already accepted their offer," I said. Silence fell so suddenly I could hear the clock ticking in the next room. "When were you planning to tell us?" Dad asked, his voice clipped. "I'm telling you now." My hands stayed steady. For once, they were the ones who looked small. Lauren reached across the table, her eyes full of the same pleading softness that once fooled me. "But Claire, we won't see you." The words slipped out before I could stop them. "You haven't seen me for years." "Not really?" The silence that followed was the kind that never heals. That was the last family dinner I ever attended. The next 4 years moved fast: classes, part-time jobs, snowstorms, new friends who learned to pronounce my name with warmth instead of weary tolerance. I rented a small studio apartment after graduation, just big enough for me and sunlight. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No family portraits on the walls, no ghosts of gatherings I wasn't invited to, just peace and a quiet kind of ownership over my own life. When my neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, returned my casserole dish one day and asked for the recipe, I invited her in for tea. She showed me photos of her grandchildren, all of them smiling, messy included. For the first time in years, the sight didn't sting. It inspired me. Slowly, my life filled with people who noticed me: Maria from the library staff room who dragged me to book club, Sarah from yoga class who invited me to her art show, the small, ordinary kindnesses of people who didn't share my blood but showed up anyway. Then came Mark. I met him at the community garden, both of us reaching for the same tomato plant. "You take it," he said. "I've killed every tomato I've ever grown." I laughed, surprising myself. "I could teach you," I said, and I did every Saturday side by side in the dirt, laughter mixing with the smell of earth and basil. Months later, kneeling beside me in that same garden, he asked about the gap in my family photos. "No wedding pictures of your siblings," he said gently. "There are 5 of you, right?" I hesitated, the old reflex to hide kicking in, but his gaze was steady, patient. "I wasn't invited," I said finally, "to any of them." He stopped digging, eyes widening. "What do you mean, not invited?" The words poured out before I could stop them. 12, 14, 16, 17, the ages I was each time they shut me out. He reached for my hand, dirt and all. "Claire, that's not normal. That's not what family does." Something inside me broke open at that, not in pain, but in release. "Was I really that forgettable?" I whispered. He pulled me into his arms, the dirt smudging between us. "No," he said softly. "They were just blind." The next week I sat in Dr. Chen's office, the air scented faintly of lavender. My fingers traced circles in the sand of the small Zen garden on her coffee table while she watched me with quiet eyes. "Your family taught you that you don't matter," she said softly, "but you kept their secret. You protected their image. Why I watched the rake carve neat lines through the sand, erasing the ones before it? Because I thought if I was understanding enough, mature enough, they'd see me differently," I said. My hands stilled, but they never did. Dr. Chen tilted her head. "And who do you see now?" The question hung between us like sunlight filtering through blinds, gentle but impossible to ignore. I didn't have an answer yet, but something inside me shifted like a seed beginning to split open underground. That evening, I went home to my small apartment, still carrying the weight of that question. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from David. "Malene's christening next month. Family only. You'll be there." The words glowed on the screen, so familiar they almost made me laugh. Family only. Always the same gatekeeping phrase dressed up as tradition. I looked around my home, the tomato plants thriving on the windowsill, Maria's watercolor painting hanging on the wall, a photo of Mark and me with dirt-streaked cheeks and genuine smiles. This was family too, just built from different soil. My thumbs hovered over the phone before typing back, "I'm busy that weekend. Good luck with the christening." I set the phone down. My hands didn't shake at all. A month later, summer ripened in Vermont. The community garden overflowed with basil tomatoes and laughter. Mark led me between rows of vines until we reached our plot, the one we'd tended for 2 years. "Remember how you taught me to stake tomatoes properly?" he asked, crouching to tie a vine. I smiled, remembering his first clumsy attempts. "You were so scared of hurting the plants." He stood brushing dirt from his jeans, something glinting in his hand. "I still am," he said, voice steady. "But you taught me something that day. Sometimes you have to be firm to help things grow strong." He opened the small velvet box. The world seemed to still around us. "Claire," he said, his eyes warm and certain, "you showed me how to build something beautiful from the ground up. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision, but I saw him clearly. "You see me," I whispered. "Always," he said, sliding the ring, a simple gold band with a single pearl onto my finger. It fit perfectly. We agreed that night, a small wedding, meaningful and true, only people who mattered. Sitting at our kitchen table later, a bottle of wine between us, I picked up a pen and stared at the blank invitation list. The spaces where sibling names should have gone looked strange. David, Joel, Lauren, Alex, each one like a ghost I'd finally stopped chasing. My pen moved past them, writing other names instead. Mrs. Wilson, Maria, Tara, people who showed up, people who saw me. Mark watched me in silence, then asked gently, "Are you sure?" I looked up at him, and for the first time my smile felt calm instead of defensive. More sure than I've ever been. 3 days later, the phone rang. Mom's voice crackled through the speaker. "When are we discussing the family invitations?" she asked. I took a breath. "We aren't," I said. "There won't be any." The pause on the other end stretched long enough that I could hear the faint sound of her bracelet clinking. "You can't be serious," she said finally, her voice rising. "This is spite. Pure childishness." I looked out the window at the tomato plants, sunlight glinting off their leaves. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "This is peace." After that, the calls came in waves. Joel rehearsed and reasonable, Alex logical and condescending, David the eldest all soft authority. "Mom and Dad won't come if you do this." Lauren last, her voice trembling. "But I'm your sister, your only sister." My chest tightened, but I didn't waver. "You were my sister when I was 16. 2, I said. 6 months, Lauren. You couldn't wait 6 months. "That was different," she cried. "We had to consider extended family venue rules, traditions." I cut her off. "Each of you had a reason. Every single time. I've heard them all." Her sob cracked through the line, but I ended the call before guilt could settle in. That night, Mark and I sat on the porch swing. The sky blushed orange with sunset cicadas humming like background music. Another text lit up my phone, Mom again. I blocked the number without opening it. Mark's arm came around my shoulders, steady and warm. "I'm proud of you," he murmured. I leaned against him, the quiet settling deep in my chest. For the first time, I said softly, "I'm proud of me too." The morning of our wedding dawned golden and calm, the kind of day that felt like a promise fulfilled. Sunlight streamed through sugar maple branches, scattering soft patterns across the grass. 80 white chairs formed gentle rows in the garden, the air filled with the scent of fresh-cut grass and wildflowers. Mrs. Wilson adjusted a bouquet of black-eyed Susans and Queen Anne's lace, her weathered hands moving with the grace of someone who knew beauty didn't need perfection. "Natural," she said with a smile. "Not too fussy, just like your own garden." I nodded, my throat tightening with quiet gratitude. Every detail felt intentional, honest. From a distance, I saw 2 empty seats in the front row, their white cushions gleaming in the morning light. The wedding coordinator hovered nearby, pen tapping against her clipboard. "We could wait another 15 minutes, she offered gently. "Sometimes traffic." "No," I said softly. "Everyone who's coming is here." My college roommate Sarah stood beside me, squeezing my hand. She knew what those empty seats meant. She had seen the tears I'd cried in our dorm room years ago, each one sparked by an invitation that never came. The violin began to play the first notes, floating through the air like a gentle breeze. I took a deep breath, fingers brushing the simple silk of my dress. No lace, no glitter, no layers to hide behind, just clean lines and truth. As I stepped onto the grass, the earth felt steady beneath my feet. The guests turned their faces full of love, not judgment. And there, beneath an arch of climbing roses, stood Mark. When our eyes met, everything else fell away. His eyes glistened, a single tear slipping down his cheek without shame. I smiled. This was what love looked like, unhidden, steady kind. The celebrant's voice rose above the music. "Marriage is about the family. We choose the ones who show up, who make space, who say you matter not just with words, but with presence." The words settled deep into me like sunlight sinking into soil. When Mark slid the ring onto my finger, his hands trembled slightly. "I choose you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for today, but for every day, to notice, to include, to cherish." My turn came, and my voice stayed strong. "I choose you," I said, "and the family will build together one, where everyone has a place at the table." Later, the reception glowed under paper lanterns strung through the trees. The tables overflowed with food, laughter, and people who had filled my life with meaning. Maria from the library, who first invited me out for coffee when I thought I'd forgotten how to say yes. Tara, who drove 6 hours after Mark's mother passed just to make sure we weren't alone. Mrs. Wilson, who toasted with iced tea instead of champagne, saying, "Family isn't about who's related, it's about who stays." Professor Jenkins, his bow tie crooked as always, raised his glass next. "Family isn't born," he said, voice full of warmth. "It's earned, built, and chosen day by day." The room erupted in genuine laughter, the kind that fills cracks instead of widening them. My heart felt full, the ache that had followed me for years, replaced by something steadier. Peace. Across the lawn, little Sophie, Mrs. Wilson's granddaughter, caught my bouquet. She ran up to me, curls bouncing, clutching the flowers. "When you have another party," she asked breathlessly, "can I come?" I knelt down, silk pooling around me. "Sophie," I said, smiling, "you will always be included. Always." She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her close, understanding the weight of those words in a way I never had before. Later that night, Mark and I stood beneath the stars. The mountains rose in dark silhouettes against the sky, and sparklers traced golden trails through the air. He pulled me close, his lips brushing my ear. "Our family," he whispered. "We'll do it differently." I leaned into him, watching the sparks fade to ember. The story I'd been born into had tried to make me small, to tuck me into the corners of other people's happiness. But that wasn't the only story available. Here, surrounded by people who chose to see me, I had written my own. And maybe that's what growing up really is, not forgiving everything, but learning where not to return. I built a life where love meant being seen, not just tolerated. Where invitations came because I was wanted, not out of obligation. Where family wasn't about shared DNA, but shared truth. As the last sparkler flickered out, I looked up at the stars, feeling the kind of peace that doesn't need permission. Some patterns, I realized, don't fade when ignored. They fade when you outgrow them.